And go.
We're on. Welcome back to Dangerous Rhetoric, guys. This is episode 88. Before we jump into it, I'm going to remind you guys, as always, to please like, comment, subscribe. We'd like to hear your thoughts, so definitely leave comments. If you want to help us keep doing this, donate. We'll gladly take your money. It's definitely not easy doing this sort of thing. The censorship is heavy right now still, and we got our second strike on our YouTube account. So one more, and we're off YouTube. But if that happens, you can always find us on dangerousrhetoric.com. We host everything on Rumble. You can find us on Spotify, all of that.
Odyssey,
yeah. With that said, today we are joined by a very special guest. We're very grateful he's taking the time to speak with us. Michael Rectenwald, who is an American scholar. He's taught at various universities, most notably NYU. His scholarship is focused mostly on 19th century secularism, contemporary secularism, free thought movement, but he's best known as a critic of the social justice movement and the woke ideology that has been spreading across the Western world. He's written a couple books on those topics, such as Springtime for Snowflakes, Social Justice and Its Postmodern Parentage, Beyond Woke, Google Archipelago, The Digital Gulag, and The Simulation of Freedom. I got to check all these books out, by the way. And your latest book is coming out soon, which is The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, Unraveling the Global Agenda, which we'll talk a bit about today. Welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining us, man.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I guess I kind of want to start a bit with like your story, like where you came from. Like I know you started in academia. When did you start to change your, I guess, focus in academia towards the political spectrum and less on the subjects that you studied and used to teach? Like what was it that kind of first brought the woke ideology to your attention where you felt like, well, I need to push back against this?
Well, I was always pretty much focused on political things, not in my research so much. Well, there was some politics involved in my research, but I was a Marxist, so I wasn't completely apolitical by any stretch.
Okay.
And I was always critical of the left, though, as a Marxist. I considered the left not to be part of Marxism. I don't agree with that now, but I did think that way. I always had issues with identity politics and with some of the leftist ideas. Mostly I thought even then that the left was really for elites, and it had nothing to do with the workers, and that in fact, the left was an impediment to Marxist hegemony, or whatever you want to call it. And then when I did criticize social justice and woke ideology, it wasn't called wokeness yet. This was 2016, and I had some other issues before 2016. I was involved as a chair of a hiring committee at NYU for a writing and journalism professor, and I saw them skip over the best candidates for somebody who could barely write a sentence and couldn't write a sentence as a writing professor based on their identity strictly. And I saw them pass over stellar applicants, and I was the chair, and I tried to stop it, and they got me thrown off the committee entirely.
Wow.
And there was several other things having to do with academic policies and stuff that started bothering me. But in 2016, it really came to a head with the safe spaces and trigger warnings and bias reporting hotlines and all that. When I did a simple interview with a New York University newspaper reporter, the student newspaper then, I criticized all of these things, and lo and behold, within 2 days, I was forced into a leave of absence and condemned by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group. Essentially, when they condemned me, that Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group, they said I was guilty for the structure of and content of my thinking. In other words, I was guilty for wrongthink.
Wrongthink. Yep.
And
just really quick, I like Gad Saad's arrangement of that acronym. He has it diversity, inclusion, and equity. He switches it around, so it
DIE, yeah,
and I think that's a little more appropriate.
Yeah. It is death by diversity in many cases, which I can talk about later. But anyway, the whole left came after me at once after this. And I just realized that I was dealing with totalitarianism. But also I noticed that when I criticized this wokeness, I noticed the whole, not just these faculty members, it wasn't students, by the way. It was faculty and administrators that came down on me like a ton of bricks. I recognized that I had hit a third rail and that this wokeness and social justice ideology was not simply about some blue-haired campus kids. This was really the ideology of the elite. This wasn't just some sort of a trend. This was really the dominant ideology because you were not allowed to criticize it. And everything really changed from there. Once I recognized the totalitarianism of the whole left, inclusive of Marxists, especially, I should say, even, I left the left. I made an announcement that I was done with the left. I didn't know where I was going, but I was homeless politically for quite a while, maybe a year or so. And then I started to critique, I started to come across criticisms of socialism and Marxism from Ludwig von Mises. And I started to get into the Austrian school. And before you know it, I immediately became a civil libertarian, but then soon I transformed into an economic libertarian as well. And so it was a process of about, let's put it this way. I was a Marxist in October of 2016, and I voted for Trump in November.
Impressive transformation.
Bad man. Canceled, you bigot.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did in that Twitter account, which I'm no longer on, and I had changed the name anyway 2 or 3 times since, the anti-PC NYU prof, as I called myself the deplorable NYU professor. And that was enough to trigger these people out of their minds. And really, I did that because I was trying to, I was in solidarity with them. I wasn't really so much a Trump fan at first. In fact, there's many criticisms I have of Trump.
Likewise.
But that's not the issue, really. The issue was the way that they were tossed into this basket of deplorables by Hillary Clinton, and the way that they were denigrated by these coastal elitists. And I frankly, I identify more with the flyover people. And I don't like elitism at all. But then I realized this elitism is tied to the elite and their agenda. And since then, I've been on a crusade of really what I would call power elite analysis.
Okay.
And that's where I am now.
Yeah, no, I think that's honestly kind of what we need. We need more daylight sort of being strewn into the system of power, how power functions, who are the real power players. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of daylight on that situation will reveal a lot of things that they don't want revealed, and that could easily threaten their power, which is why they try so hard to avoid critique, why they're in league with the big tech companies, why certain things are forbidden to be spoken on YouTube or TikTok or Twitter.
A friend of ours posted something on Twitter the other day. It says, truth does not mind being questioned. A lie does not like being challenged. And it becomes very obvious when you look at who's getting banned, who's getting suspended, who's actually speaking the truth and like challenging the elite and posing a threat to them. Because, if you're not facing any kind of censorship at all, you're probably not really much of a threat. You're probably not saying anything that's really rocking the boat,
Exactly. And what I recognize, one of the things that's changed over this period, so when I was a Marxist, you're trained to believe that, capitalist ideology is the dominant ideology, and, you know, libertarianism is the ultimate enemy. Anything to do with the free market and all that. But then I realized over the course of very, very short time that the actual dominant ideology is leftist.
Yeah.
This is a very, very, for a Marxist, that's a very big thing to come to, believe me. Believe me, that kind of realization is that you realize the elite are leftists. Now, I've talked about why they're leftists and stuff pretty much in the last few books I've written. And in this new one, I talk about that.
You posted something yesterday on your Facebook that I thought was an interesting point that I wanted to touch on a bit. I guess I'll read the quote of from your latest book. You wrote, "With its apparent concern for the universal common good, leftist ideology provides the best cover for disguising totalitarian ambitions. Leftist totalitarians attempt to exert control over the world for the supposed welfare of the masses, the community, the disadvantaged, the developing world, women, children, the economy, the planet. Rightist totalitarianism, on the other hand, wears its totalitarian ambitions on its sleeve. It openly suggests that it must dominate for its own sake because of some putative natural superiority. Such avowed supremacism does not represent a viable approach for achieving global hegemony. This explains why rightist totalitarianism is very rare, while leftist totalitarianism virtually dominated the 20th century. Nazism is a curious case. It was both socialist while also race supremacist. Rightist totalitarianism, if it ever exists in pure form, offers little opportunity for buy-in from the masses. Its aim for domination is made too explicit. Leftist totalitarianism, on the other hand, poses as benign and clearly beneficial, as the de facto no-fault ideology whose moral probity is deemed unassailable. A supposed universal concern for the common good not only hides its totalitarian ambitions from the masses, but also perhaps from the elites themselves." I thought this was a really fascinating point. I guess we had kind of thought of it in this way, but I'd never quite had heard it articulated quite in this way. So I thought it was profound.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. Now some would say, I got some pushback on that post that it's there is no such thing as a right and left and all that. Okay, but people adopt positions that are leftist, and so whether they're real or not, they adopt these positions, and there's a reason why. It's a smokescreen for a totalitarianism. And I said rightist totalitarianism is, in its pure form, is very rare. In fact, I think it's almost unexampled in history. I don't think there's any pure right-wing totalitarianism in history that I can speak of. Whereas the 20th century is littered with the corpses of victims to leftist totalitarianism.
Yeah, and it's always, under the guise of this is for the common good,
right.
Look at the Bolsheviks and everything that they did and what resulted from that, and there are still people today, like I see everywhere, who praise these people, who praise Lenin.
Yeah.
There were these heroes who still whose ideas, if we just embraced them, would result in this beautiful society where
if only I was implementing their ideas, it would be perfect. Yes, and we'd reach utopia.
Which Jordan Peterson talks about this often. When people say that, like, oh, well, real communism hasn't been tried yet. Like, what they're actually saying is that, well, if I did it or if we did it, then we would do it the correct way. But what is the correct way,
And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of compassion. It's almost like compassion trolling, where the leftists claim to be the compassionate party. They claim to be the defenders of the weak and defenders of the minorities, when in actuality, they are more akin to slave owners. They look at us property. They look at gays as property. They look at trans people as property, and they get very uppity whenever there's a gay or a trans person or an African American,
any minority
that does
group.
that does not line up. Then they're even seen as worse than a white Christian conservative, for example, who it's expected from. It's just very
it violates their orthodoxy, and it is it's they're paternalistic to the nth degree. So and very patronizing. So and crippling of those people that they claim to be advocates for.
Yeah, it reminds me of like the all-consuming mother archetype. It's almost like a corrupt maternalism. It's not so, to me, it doesn't seem paternalistic. And it's more, it's like a very consuming mother is what it reminds me of. And it's similar to, cluster B dynamics. We can get into that once.
I guess it's kind of a narcissistic mother maternalism.
Yeah, and they literally want to control identity and how it's expressed. They talk about tolerance and all this stuff, but what it comes down to is they're very intolerant of any diversity of thought. So, we talked to Adam Coleman a couple episodes back, and it's like people like him get accused of not blacking correctly. You're not doing blackness correctly if you don't, adhere to the Democrat worldview or the extreme leftist worldview or whatever. You're not doing it right. You can't hold any conservative position at all. And someone like him is more of a moderate. He identifies as independent. He just voted Republican for the first time, but he still identifies as an independent. But
I think this is what whatever his flaws or whatever his mistakes, I think this is what Kanye West is basically saying, that they're mentally trying to enslave you.
Yes,
you're not allowed freedom of thought, and you can't go outside of these shackles that they have, these mind forged manacles. To put it in Blakean terms, you can't shake these mind forged manacles that they have forged for you. And if you do, you're off the reservation intellectually, and that's not allowed.
Yeah, and that's why they're attacking Kanye and doing everything they can. They're the anti-Semitism. They'll say all kinds of things in order to paint him just to be as the worst person possible, because as soon as you step outside of that box, it's like you said, they start coming after you because they want to control you.
Kanye's not really the best with his words, though.
No,
he very much.
People call him a genius. I don't know his music.
Yeah,
verbally, he's no genius.
Okay? He's certainly very creative, and he has a really strong sense of self and personality.
Yeah,
and he's willing to stand up for whatever he does.
He's independent. Yeah,
he's independent
thinker.
That's what they hate.
I don't think he's a genius verbally, but I have no idea about his music. My son, he vouches for his genius as a musician. My son is a musician, so I'll take his word for it. But
I haven't explored his discography enough, to make that. Like, I listen to some rap music, but I haven't really gone much into Kanye and stuff. But but clearly he is successul for a reason. And
absolutely.
Yeah,
he's a sculptor, according to my son. He's a musical sculptor. That he's able to sculpt some sort of music in a way that's totally original, and he said nobody is doing what he does. So I believe it. I just haven't, it's not I'm not sure if it's my cup of tea at all. I just haven't really sampled it, as they would say. I haven't sampled it.
Yeah, he's definitely changed a lot. I feel like just a few years ago, he was someone I honestly couldn't really stand. Like, I thought his ego was just way too big. And it's been interesting to see him try to put that aside, to get rid of the flashy clothes. He was talking to Lex Friedman, and I watched that interview the other day, and he's, sitting there in a dirty hoodie with like paint stains on it and stuff, and like a trucker hat. So it's just like, the transformation of Kanye has been fascinating to see. But on the subject of censorship, we're seeing that pushback against him. What was the offending tweet that got you booted off of Twitter?
Well, I can't really be sure. They won't tell me. But I think that it had to do with some tweets that I made about transgenderism and abortion.
Okay.
Now, all I said was I thought it was part of, not the whole thing, but it's part of a neo-Malthusian depopulation campaign.
I think
And
I agree with that.
yeah, I mean, it's not, and some people say, well, they're not mutilating enough people to be controlling the population. Well, they're confusing enough and mutilating plenty others enough that its tendency is towards that. And certainly abortion can obviously be seen as part of I mean, this is Planned Parenthood said so themselves. They have been on paper saying basically they have been trying.
So, I mean, I'll go further and say that this is like a multifaceted plan where there's multiple factors at play here to, if not simply just reduce it, but slow the population down. And like, you know, people like to say, oh, Bill Gates wants to reduce the population. From what I've looked at, he's not on record saying that. What he is on record saying, though, is we need to slow the population growth.
Oh, so, yeah. This is depopulation growth. Yeah.
That's bad enough, you know.
Frankly, it's the same thing. So at the end of the day, if you're slowing growth, you're still killing people.
Yes.
Or preventing people from coming into existence.
By multifaceted, though, you know, the lockdowns, the you know,
I won't say anything about that. Don't worry.
The pushing of the of abortion, right, and making that not only something that's like should be an option, but something that is almost like praised now. Like it's
brave and beautiful.
Yeah, it's no longer.
It's
not pro-choice anymore. It's pro-abortion now. So
they get these little girls, 13 years old, to stand on baby dolls' heads and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's sick. You know?
It's very sick and it's very anti-human.
Yeah.
And they've glamorized it and made it into like something that you can't do without.
It's like a sacrament almost in their faith.
Like, so the trans stuff is the same.
Yeah, this trans stuff is also very sacramental.
And they've glamorized it. Like it's spreading around because social media, that's the main thing. I mean, if you look at the correlation, it's very clear. The rise in that and the rise in popularity of things like TikTok and Instagram, like the youth are seeing these things and it's a glamorized thing now. It's a lifestyle. And they're not taught about the repercussions. They're not being warned against, you know, like that there could be any possible consequences.
There's no informed consent. There's no consent really at all, because I would argue that what's happening to these kids is a sexual experience, and they cannot give consent because they are minors.
Yeah.
And I would even argue that some of these surgeons are fetishists.
There's something up with that. They're definitely not.
They're using the whole cloak of, you know, medical authority and legitimate practice.
But every time you criticize this transgender movement, you get accused of being a transphobe.
Yep.
You know, and I'm not a transphobe. I'm actually disgusted by it. I'll be real frank. But I'm not a phobe in the sense that I'm afraid of or have some sort of. I would never act prejudicially against somebody based on their identity.
I think, you know, people who have legitimate dysphoria and struggle with that mentally, I sympathize with it. And we've had a couple detransitioners on the show. We've had 3 on, but we've had a trans person on as well, Sarah Higdon, you know, who does not require people to play this mental game, that they are exactly what they are trying to appear as. They know they're biologically male. Sarah knows that. Sarah just simply is dealing with dysphoria, made these decisions to try to live more comfortably, but agrees with our positions that we need to stop doing this and pushing this toward the youth, you know, and we need to stop this like a firm approach, and we need to go back to the watchful waiting approach when it comes to dealing with that very small minority of people who have dysphoria that continues, you know, out in their adolescence.
But it's apparently part of a very big agenda. And the question is, what is this agenda? And I think part of it is Malthusian, neo-Malthusian. Part of it is other things. I think it's about debasing the family, breaking up the family unit, because if you get rid of husband and wife, man, woman, you get rid of husband and wife, you get rid of husband and wife, you get rid of husband, wife, and child, you're a long way towards dismantling the family entirely. So, you know,
it's a war on reality, it feels like, because when you start getting rid of concepts as basic as biological sex, basically anything goes at that point. If we can't even as a society agree anymore on just very basic things like that, we're off the deep end, you know.
Well, this is interesting that you know, I'm no Putin fan, but he said some very interesting things about this. He said, we've been through this movie before with the Bolsheviks, and we don't want anything to do with it, where everything is changing, all the definitions, birthing mother, you know, chest feeder, menstruating person, all this new nomenclature. This is part of a revolution. This is part of a cultural Marxist revolution.
Yeah, I've been calling it neo-communism because it's, you know, it's new. It's like a new face, and also it's like the American variant, which, you know, we have Bolshevism in Russia, and we have the Chinese communism and Maoism in China. America, it's going to be different. It's got to be trendy. It's got to be flashy. It's got to be popular. And it's got to be just packaged in just the right way that, you know, it appeals to young people, because that's who they're targeting with this. They know
for sure.
They can't get, you know, older people, because our brains are actually developed and we have critical capacities and experience that we can reflect on. But these young people, if they can separate them from us and turn us into the enemy, and then capture the young people, which is probably why they're going after the schools and the teachers.
Right.
And also things like TikTok. Like TikTok in America, it has a different set of algorithmic priorities than it does in China. Yeah. And it's an interesting point. You see a lot of transgenderism on TikTok, and you see a lot of, you know, homosexuality and LGBT. And in China, it's all science experiments and, like, you know, technical stuff. And
so it's obvious they have, you know, a particular thing they want to promote here in the West. But, you know, you brought up homosexuality, and when, you know, Brent and I are gay, if you didn't know. Yeah. And one of the things we are concerned about with the whole trans ideology movement is the vast majority of these kids who are gender nonconforming go through puberty and they age. They're probably just going to turn out to be lesbian or gay adults.
Certainly. It's part of the.
So it's just
in that sense, it's almost eugenics.
It's like conversion therapy. It's like a literal form of conversion therapy where we're like, well, you're not good the way you are. Right. So maybe you're actually the other sex, you know, and maybe we should change you into a heterosexual or whatever. And it's just, it's crazy. And we're concerned because, one, you know, the whole thing makes us look bad. And we definitely want to draw that line and say, hey, look, there are plenty of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans people out there. There are, you know,
not even plenty. We are the majority.
Yeah. And we mentioned Sarah before, who disagree with this approach and promoting this stuff in schools, shoving it down, you know, children's throats, and just like indoctrinating them with this stuff, because it reflects badly on us, but also it's harming people like us, kids who probably will turn out like us, and they're not even given,
if they were allowed to,
if they were allowed to, they're not being given a chance to really figure that out anymore. They're just being told, like, oh, well, you're probably the other sex.
In fact, you see this happening in some Islamic cultures where they're trying to convert people into transgenderism, because being gay is verboten. It's
a standard practice for homosexual men in Iran. If they don't want to get out, if they want, they transition.
Yeah. Wow. Whereas here in the West, it's like praised, you know, whereas over there, it's a practice to literally.
So this puts a taint on being gay and lesbian, in effect.
It does.
Yeah.
TikTok, interesting. I also wanted to mention, maybe we can move on to. Do you want to move on to current events?
I will let you direct that.
So I've been censored a couple of times on TikTok. I like to do 60-second little current event news updates just to, like, whet people's appetite, you know, practice my comedy, and, you know, encourage people to do their own research on subjects. So I started questioning this Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi break-in situation from last week, and TikTok censors almost every video I make about it. They pull down.
Oh, sure.
So it's interesting that this is like it's a button issue for them. They're very concerned about people, you know, they're calling it misinformation, but really I think the official story is the misinformation, because it just doesn't line up.
When you see this damage control, you got to ask.
It's damage control of a very perhaps embarrassing situation. I don't know the story, obviously. I wasn't there, and I don't know what happened, but there's certain elements of the story that don't fit together very well. And I don't trust the FBI whatsoever.
Never.
You can't, right? I mean,
we definitely don't.
It's just, well, since their inception, they've been a political organization that has constantly sort of covered up for the elites and engaged in things like blackmail and, you know, all kinds of political, I mean, Watergate and all the whole nonsense.
And once you have them show up at your door to ask questions to you, you definitely don't see them in the same way anymore.
That's what happens.
I mean, they engage in entrapment all the time, you know. And this is not to say anything about the CIA, who I think are murderers. You know?
Oh yeah, and it's like it's that taken to it's like squared and then broadcast internationally. It's a whole pickle, and they're above any sort of scrutiny. And anybody who does try to scrutinize them has a unfortunate accident. You know, like Michael Hastings, who was he was a 30-some reporter working for Rolling Stone. He was doing a piece on, I think it was John Brennan, who was the ex-director of the CIA at the time of the guy's death. And Michael Hastings had a car accident one night because his car just randomly accelerated to ridiculous speeds, crashed into a tree, and he died. And it was all sort of just...
Yes, there's been a number of those types of accidents where somehow the car accelerates in the middle of the city, and people are running into houses and trees, and it just so happens that they have been recently criticizing something, you know, typically something to do with Hollywood, or typically to do with something to do with the elite. Their practices. There was this coin, this crypto guy that just died, I think in San Juan, where he said that there was the CIA was setting up a pedophilia entrapment circle, and in fact he died 24 hours later, drowned in the bay.
Wow.
He said before he died that he would be killed. So he said, if I die, it's, you know, because the CIA basically tortured or killed me.
Jesus. I'm gonna put a note to look that up. I hadn't heard that story.
Yeah, I can find his name if you want me to.
I think I just found it. No, maybe that's not it.
Jerry Colton?
No, that's a different guy.
No.
It's okay. I'll look it up later. But yeah, this is the thing that we see, you know, these thorganizations, and it's very much akin to like a pathological family where you have a parent who's a psychopath or malignant narcissist or a borderline, or both parents are, you know, cluster B. And I think it seems like we are being treated like the children in that family. And mom and dad are off their rocker. They don't care about us. They expect
psychopaths.
Yeah.
So you're leading into the next thing.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, political ponerology.
So
the foreword
to this new edition.
I encourage everybody to pick up this book.
Yeah,
it's
very important.
The knowledge in here, I think, is probably some of the most important human knowledge that we have as a species, because it really, for the first time, sort of distills the essence of human evil and puts it articulates it in psychological language that makes it so we can understand it and we can identify it and we can see the red flags in advance, and then we can choose, hey, I don't want to be associated with that.
For those who aren't aware, ponerology is the study of evil, which the word was coined by the author of this book, Andrei Lobachevsky. What's so interesting about his approach was he was basically the first guy who formulated a way to study the concept of evil in a scientific, categorical way. And he believed that we can't just rely on the theologians and the philosophers anymore to address this problem of what is evil. We need to look at other things like biology and psychology and the brain, and all sorts of things to try to understand where does this abhorrent behavior that some people have towards fellow people come from. And it's just, personally, when I first started learning about these concepts, it changed my entire way of looking at history. Not just modern history, but history in general. It explains so much. It kind of fits everything together in a way that I had never really conceived of before. So you wrote the foreword to this book. How did you first hear about Andrei Lobachevsky and political ponerology?
Well, actually, Harrison Coeli was a member of my what I call the Rectenwald Writing and Reading Treehouse.
Nice. We love Harrison.
What's that?
We love Harrison. Shout out to Harrison.
Yeah, Harrison's great. He's a smart guy. He's the expert on this, not me. He's by far the expert on ponerology.
Yes. For those who haven't yet, go watch our episode with Harrison. Very good episode.
Yeah, absolutely. He's brilliant. He's a scholar of this stuff. He's deeply enmeshed in the scholarship, so he knows all the sources, all the. He also knows, previous precursors to it, and positions that are pretty parallel to this. But he's right in suggesting that Lobachevsky is the first to actually develop the science of evil, which is psychology and to some extent biological. What I find interesting about the book, I'm not a psychologist, and that's not my field. I like studying large cultural phenomenon. I was trained in cultural studies and actually theory and cultural studies, cultural theory. You know what that means, critical theory and postmodern theory and all that. But what I liked about it was the way he describes how, which I never thought possible, of understanding totalitarian regimes, was to examine the earlier carriers and to show how they spread their sick pathocratic ideology to the rest of the population.
Yeah.
This was something that I was kind of skeptical about. But this really was quite convincing, this book, in arguing that, it begins with a few pathological people. In the case of Marxism, it begins with a sociopath, apparently. And then it gets picked up by psychopaths who then use it to propagate this ideology and use it to their own ends. Yeah. So that would be Lenin and Stalin and Mao and so forth. But these people are out and out psychopaths. And they managed to put in a psychopathic regime in place and to surround themselves with other psychopaths to the exclusion of normal people, as Lobachevsky would put it. And that's the part of it I found really important.
And the results of this is, what he called macro social evil. Right. Typically when we look at evil, we're looking at a micro scale. We're looking at, things being done from individuals to individuals in our communities and things like that. He was trying to understand, well, how do you get this larger form of evil that can exterminate large groups of people all at once? And what is it that can get so many to turn their conscience off? And that's how I like to put it, because this is how I've been viewing conscience, this idea of a conscience, for a while now, since I started to grasp what a psychopath is. And from what I understand, a psychopath does not have this mechanism.
Right.
Most people do. And the thing about a conscience is it can be reduced, it can be turned on or turned off. The psychopath doesn't have it. They can act like they have it. And what they do is when they get into power, they can get large amounts of people to be selective with their conscience or to actually just turn it off. And it is sort of like an infection, like you said. It's interesting because it makes me think of Gad Saad's book, The Parasitic Mind, when you talk about the woke ideology and die, right? That's how he's describing it as well. He's describing those ideologies as a sort of parasitic thing. It's something that affects people, takes them over, almost like demonic possession. And I wish Gad Saad would read this book, because I think it would put what he's writing there into a larger perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And the question then becomes, what is it parasitic on? And that, I think, is a key problem. I think it's parasitic on egalitarianism, in effect, because it uses our standard belief that everybody is legally equal, or if you want to put it in theocratic terms, equal in the eyes of God, and not theocratic, theological. I didn't mean theocratic, theological terms, equal in the eyes of God. And then it uses that in our current scenario, it plays on this rhetoric and this ideology of equality, and then it subverts it.
Yeah.
So this is what we see going on. So I don't think there's a book that's more apropos to our situation today than political ponerology. We're under a ponerological system. I can't think of it in any other way. It is evil, whether that has any cosmic, metaphysical undergirding or not, or implications. I won't say. I'm not going there. A lot of people ask me to go there. In many ways, I like.
It's not even necessary. I don't even think it's necessary. But
not necessary.
Obviously, we can look at it through those lenses, and we can look at theology, and we can look at mysticism, we can look at philosophy, and combine those insights with the scientific insights of this book. But it's not really necessary. I think what's great about Lobachevsky is he makes these concepts accessible to anyone, no matter what your belief system is.
Right.
One of the things I wanted to address is, most people have a conscience, like I said. We're normal for the most part. Although, we could address how our society is collectively going mad. But I think when you have a conscience, what these people play on, the psychopath, is they play on this natural tendency as people with the conscience to believe that there's a little bit of good in everyone. And we want to believe that as people with the conscience. We want to believe that even Hitler is redeemable, that even Lenin is redeemable. And that might be a flawed way of looking at reality. And this was one of the hardest things for me personally to let go of when I started learning about these things is, maybe there are people out there who in their very nature just are evil. They are like an intraspecies predator in a sense. They're fundamentally different than us. They look like us, they can act like us, they can mimic things, but they're fundamentally different. And our natural tendency to want to think there's a little bit of good in everyone prevents us from really seeing that.
Exactly. The problem is that normal people, as Lobachevsky would call them, they give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and they assume that everybody has the same basic
moral landscape
as others, and the same principles, in effect, the same basic constituents of personality in some sense. So of course, there's variations on that, but we don't want to think that there's something endemically wrong with other people. And that's the problem, actually. That's how we get duped.
Yeah, it seems like there's this unwillingness to sort of accept that there are some people out there that are just like empty, hungry pain monsters. All they want to do is inflict pain on the people around them, and they will do it in legal ways or illegal ways, depending on their, access to resources, their intelligence. You can have very intelligent, wealthy psychopaths that probably avoid detection their entire lives. And then you have, psychopaths who are born into, in areas like Compton, and they, join a gang, and, they either don't last long or end up in prison.
Robert Hare addresses this in his book, Without Conscience. He looks at, the nature versus nurture aspect of this. And when it comes to like a psychopath, what we're seeing here is there's something in the nature of that individual that is preventing a parent-child bond, first of all, and is preventing them from having the full range of human emotions and that full range of experience.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that our culture will not deal with, because there's been this trend of what I call environmental determinism, that people are mostly determined by the environment.
Yes.
And there's been this hatred towards genetic determinism. And this is very typical of socialist and Marxist ideology, actually. This is why they wouldn't accept Darwinism in the Soviet Union, and Lysenkoism flourished, because they believed in the environmental conditions were all determinative.
So Robert Hare in the book addresses that as well. And, you know, if there's something in the nature that's making them a psychopath, what the nurture seems to determine is the type of psychopath that comes out.
Oh, I see. That's
so, you know, and this, you know, he's not like 100% on this. Obviously, we need to do more research to figure this stuff out. But, you know, say you have someone where that conscience isn't present, right? The child-parent bond is not taking place very early on. But, like, all the things that should have been provided for them are provided. The parents are good, right? They got an education, all this stuff. You might end up with a psychopath who is more charming, more coercive, more manipulative, and, as Brent said, more able to evade detection. If you have one who's, say, born in the ghetto, doesn't have a present father figure, grows up on the streets, you know, gets beat as a kid, all this stuff, they might become more aggressive and they might use more violence, more outright violence, to get what they want, to manipulate people that way. Then you have, you know, the like crazy butcher, like serial killer. And like on Mindhunters, people should go watch that. And those types are interesting because that's typically, I think, what usually, I think this is changing too. I think more and more people are becoming aware that it's not just this. But when most people hear the word psychopath, that's what they think of. They think of the killers, the butchers, the people who are
violent. They don't think of Klaus Schwab, or Anthony Fauci, or. And this is the leap that I think Lobaczewski makes, and I'd like to take us there. Is that what if our elites are psychopaths?
Yep.
What if we're dealing with what if we're living under pathocracy? And how do we deal with that question? And so how do we know? That's the big question. How do we know? I think we have all the markers that Lobaczewski laid out that we're living under pathocracy now.
Yeah.
And because they're doing all the things that pathocrats do, all the doublespeak, the what he called recursive blockades, where they're speaking the exact opposite of the truth. So this blocks your access to the truth because they say the exact opposite, and then you go, oh, well, he's saying this, but I think this, but maybe it's somewhere in the middle, instead of, no, this person is outright lying. Not only lying, but they're inverting reality, which is, I think, what's going on today in our leadership. They're inverting reality on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah.
Gaslighting the hell out of us.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we had this Dylan Mulvaney just sat down with the president, like this person who just started being trans like 200 and something days ago.
Not even a year,
like, and is like sitting down to discuss these things with the president. And you have the president in this interview basically advocating for the sterilization and mutilation of our youth, and advocating for this elimination of biological sex. They are inverting reality.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
It's useful, though. Once you realize that's what they're doing, then you can sort of start to determine where reality lies by presuming.
Yeah, that's right. But it's very scary for some people that, like, you know, unlike ourselves, who have others we can talk to about these things because they understand what we're saying. Imagine being completely lost for context and you have no anchors and you don't know what's happening, and you don't have any guidestones or criteria for determining this. You know, it's got to be really disorienting, to say the least. People that are tossed into this vacuum.
I think some people, a lot of people actually full scale at which this is happening, meaning the trans stuff, the puberty blockers, those sorts of things. I was talking to my grandma about this a couple weeks ago, and she just turned 82 on Halloween. So she was born in 1940. She's from an entirely different world and generation. And very often she's in a nursing home now, but very often she would say to me over the last few years, like, I don't recognize the world anymore. She had no idea that this stuff was happening at the
same with my mother before she died. Exactly. I would almost spare her telling her the things that were going on.
Yeah.
But she would be like, oh my, I told her some things and she was like, oh my God. She couldn't believe it. She just couldn't recognize the world. So she basically shut off from it. Likewise, I'm very happy that she didn't actually have to live in this very long.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if anything, Lobachevsky describes like what he calls the historical cycle, where he talks about society progressively losing its ability to determine reality, and how we become more hysterical. We become very easily triggered, and that with COVID and with the election of Donald Trump, it's like. I was studying. I came across ponerology, I guess, right when Harrison,
the first edition.
So this was like 2006, I think, when it first came out.
A while.
And even back then, I was sort of like, convinced that like this was like the stuff.
2012 for me.
But really, once Trump got elected, and then subsequently with the lockdowns and the mandates and all the craziness, it just becomes clear that we are in a hysterical state.
Oh, totally.
And it's like we can't even have discussions about very basic issues like what is a man and what is a woman.
Yep, people are scared.
The next thing that they're going to erase, by the way, is age. That's coming. That's going to be
Or on more mundane levels, just like you had Biden getting out of saying recently, and I'm not getting into partisanship here, but I will say this: the Democrats are the carriers of totalitarian ideology, the primary uniparty carriers of it. And he said basically, this isn't your grandfather's Republican Party, but really that applies to the Democrats. Now, this isn't your grandparents' Democratic Party, that's for sure.
Yeah.
This isn't, my father was a Reagan Democrat. He was, a Democrat because he came up through the Depression, but then he became a Reaganite, for various reasons. But they wouldn't recognize this for the world. What the hell these people are about.
I feel like we really lost Republicans and Democrats over the last 20 years. The Republicans kind of went when post 9/11, we had George Bush, the neocons, the Karl Roves, that we lost conservatism entirely. Started spending money like left, right, and center. Let's launch a war here. Let's launch a war.
This isn't conservatism at all. This is neocon, neoliberal. I don't even like the word neoliberal because it's used so many different ways. But this is totally. Let's be real. These Trotskyites took over. These ex-Trotskyites took over this movement. The whole slew of them were Trotskyites, and so they were looking for a new form of imperialism. This isn't conservatism at all.
No.
So, if anything, the Trump thing was kind of a turn back to a sort of earlier type of conservatism in the 19th century, when there was a populist kind of movement in which there would be some protectionism and nationalism without. It's not fascism. It's a particular type of political conservatism that's got a very deep American history that doesn't have anything to do with Nazism or Italian fascism or any of that.
Yeah, nationalism has become a bad word now. You're not allowed to like America. America is the great Satan now, according to the left. And anytime you talk good about America at all, they call you a Christo-fascist.
Yeah,
right.
And, like, we went up to protest in Burlington. Fred Sargent, who was a gay rights pioneer, he was down at Stonewall, protesting. It actually happened. He was attacked up in Burlington, so we went up and we protested the same group 2 weeks after he was attacked. And these people thought we were all Christian conservatives when we were straight. We were mostly a bunch of gay people.
Yeah, you're defending like the real legacy of the movement.
Yeah, and also all the troons, as I call them, the transgender goons, they were all young. Everybody, there was hardly anyone under the age of 35 that.
So they have absolutely no historical references at all.
No, correct.
Nope. Well, there was the one that you were.
I had to inform one.
Yeah, you were like, he's a gay rights icon. You said to him, and he looked at you like you had two heads. Like, huh?
Gay rights icon.
Gay rights icon. Why is he holding that sign?
What does gay not queer mean? Yeah. Like, these people didn't even know that queer was a slur up until 5 minutes ago.
Yep.
Right.
And it's it blows my mind. It's like they've got no information, but I guess this is how communism sort of evolves at the macro social scale.
Pathocracy.
Pathocracy. I also wanted to just make a quick point that, serial killers individually, I think the most prolific serial killer, according to Wikipedia here, is some guy who has between possibly up to 250 lifetime kills. 250 kills for the most prolific serial killer ever. And when we look at communism is they don't even know, but the estimate is somewhere upwards around 100 million people that they killed. And then you look at Russia, and that's somewhere 10 to 50 million people that they killed, and all the various in South America,
Maoist China, the struggle sessions, all of that.
Yeah, 60 to 70 million if you count the famine.
So pathocracy is like serial killing at multiple orders of magnitude.
Many orders, yes. And this is what they're hands down in support of. So my new book, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, is a study of these power elites. Now, I don't go into ponerological analysis of it, but it's pretty apparent when you see what their views are, that there is a pathocratic agenda underway.
So this term, the Great Reset, it's been thrown around a lot in the last couple of years. In particular, I believe it comes from the World Economic Forum, right? Were they the ones?
Oh yeah, it's their term. Although it goes back further than that.
Okay.
It was used by Richard Florida in his book called The Great Reset in 2010, which wasn't about this global reset. It was about he talked about great resets happening periodically during effectively periods of economic downturn, during depressions, the Long Depression and the Great Depression. He called great resets, and he said after 2008 with the financial crash in 2008 that it was another great reset. So Schwab adopted this parlance and then applied it to this global reset that he's had in mind for years. This is a whole totally different kind of reset. This is an interventionist reset that's undertaken deliberately and not something that happens on its own spontaneously or anything like that.
So if, for people who aren't familiar with this, if someone were to ask you, Michael, what is the Great Reset? What is the agenda? How would you define it? How would you explain that to them?
Well, I wrote a few essays by that title. I would say, there's several prongs. You have an economic prong, you have a environmental prong, you have a neo-Malthusian prong, and you have a technological prong. The economic prong is really best encapsulated by Ida Auken's statement in her blog that's still up on Forbes magazine, by the way, that you will own nothing and be happy. So the idea there is basically resetting the economy such that you will be stripped of your possessions and will live in a two-tiered system of what I call actually existing socialism on the ground and a kind of state hybrid, corporate hybrid monopoly on top. I call it capitalism with Chinese characteristics. It really is modeled after China. That's Ida Auken's piece.
It's it's like a neo-feudalism almost.
It's it's neo-feudalism. It's corporate socialism. It's economic fascism. It's capitalism with Chinese characteristics. It's all of those. It's like sweet and sour pork. You can't really use one label to define it. It's all of those things at once.
It's funny.
That's the economic prong. The environmental prong is the rationale for doing this. They're using environmentalism and climate change as the pretext for undertaking this. And they're instituting neo-Malthusian population growth control to as well. That's another prong. And they're using technology as the enforcement mechanism for this through digital IDs and CBDC or central bank digital currency. There's so many elements to the Great Reset. The book that I wrote is 365 pages plus an index. It's long. So I tried to get at all of the elements and put them all together and make sense of them together.
Yeah, it's great. And that's what we need. We need more analysis of this kind of stuff, and that's one of the reasons I think they nuked James Lindsay and yourself off there, is because you are individuals that have this knowledge. You're intelligent enough to grok it, and you're also articulate enough to transmit it in a distilled and intelligent form that less intelligent or more normal people who don't have, the time to really dive deeply into these issues, so that they can acquire that knowledge and then, understand what's going on.
James was
I met James Lindsay about, I think it was early October, so about a month ago, and I said to him jokingly, at this time I still had a Twitter account. I said, I finally have more Twitter followers than you. And he said, yeah, that's right. And little did I know, well, I kind of had a feeling I would be also bumped.
Yeah, we met him as well in Texas. We went to It was the Minds? No, not the Minds Festival. It was the Better Discourse Conference.
Better Discourses.
Yeah. By Myth Informed. And, I sat with him for a couple hours and we just chatted and joked around. And, he's a very genuine person. He really,
he's a very bright guy too.
Really cares about these issues. People accuse him of all these horrible things. They call him, a homophobe and all this stuff. Nope. He broke bread with me. Perfectly fine. He's,
no, he's not homophobe. He's not a bigot or anything.
Nope, none of that stuff. So,
I mean, this is just bullshit. I've been called a transphobe and I've been called a homophobe just for the post that I put about neo-Malthusianism. People on Facebook were saying this is a libertarian. This sounds like an authoritarian to me, because I criticized this transgender movement. I didn't say anything about transgender persons and individuals. I'm talking about a cultural trend that's, obviously is identifiable and it's demonstrably happening. This is not about persons or individuals, which I'd never discriminate against on the basis of their identities. It's entirely different to talk about macro social evil or macro social trends, even if you don't think they're evil. They're obviously trends. What is more likely? 1,000 years ago, we had this huge squelched transgender identity, or there's a cultural mania going on right now. Which more likely?
A social contagion. And that's the thing, they like to say, well, there's an increase in gender nonconforming and trans people because now our society is more accepting of them. And that's why there's more of them. And maybe that's a bit of it. But it does not explain, for example, numbers that were coming out of the UK, where we were seeing a 5,000% increase in kids attending gender clinics because they're confused about this stuff. That's a social contagion. That's not happening.
Nothing to do with propaganda or ideological propagation or indoctrination and all that. No. This is just a trend. Because people were repressed for thousands of years and suddenly they're coming out. Give me a break.
Nope. It does not explain the sheer number of it. It doesn't.
And this is another thing, along with the knowledge of psychopathy and other cluster B personality disorders, that is key. Ideas can be just as pathological as viruses, bacteria, fungi. And we don't really have that reference. We don't have that understanding because the ideas are not a physical thing. They're a cognitive. They're a concept. They're a set of concepts, even an ideology. But since they're not a physical thing, it's a lot harder for us to understand how they can cause non-physical or physical effects, like mass genocide or racism or bigotry and those like these ideas are contagious. And the cure is actually being aware that knowledge that can happen, and that some ideas that can cause cause just as much physical harm as, say, COVID or HIV or anything else you can catch, any other kind of infection.
Yeah, well, I talk about
it's funny they don't see that when it comes to their own thing. In other words, they're really willing to understand that our ideas or my ideas are contagious and evil, and they could spread, and therefore I have to be thwarted. But they don't have self-propagating ideas of their own.
So, we're talking about propagating, and I'm going to mention this book again, and I mentioned it 100 times in the show, but everyone please go read Propaganda by Edward Bernays, because one of the reasons this stuff happens is people don't understand the methods that are being used against them. They don't understand that the elites study that stuff.
Oh, they have.
Elites want to understand, how do we control the crowd? How do we control the mass mind, right? And what methods can we use to get them to think a certain way, do certain things?
Is that Le Bon? Gustave Le Bon, the crowd?
Gustave Le Bon was crowd psychology.
And Bernays was propaganda.
Well, Bernays, what he did was he took the theories of Le Bon and he fused them with the psychoanalytical theories of
don't read Le Bon,
his uncle,
painful.
Freud, and he started to fuse them to create this concept of how to create propaganda. And he would work for corporations and political campaigns to sell ideas or to sell products.
I remember trying to read Le Bon. It was hard.
Well, propaganda is really easy to read.
Propaganda is easy.
It's a short book, but again, this is what the elites study. So if you don't understand the mechanisms that are being used against you, it's just you're going to be more susceptible to it. And what it comes down to is we are all susceptible to propaganda. All of us.
Yeah.
The people who think they're not, you're the most susceptible, more than anyone.
Propaganda probably could be explained in sort of biochemical terms. It has there's a parasite has a way of attaching itself, right? And similarly, propaganda works by somehow attaching itself to your mental cognitive to your cognitive operations, and then infecting that, and then self-propagating within that.
Well, all ideas do that, though, and
all ideas do that. I mean, this is why ideas rule the world, really.
And this is how Bernays defined propaganda. He wasn't defining it as something that was good or evil. Really, he was kind of defining any attempt to spread any kind of idea or message as propaganda. Like this right now, what we're doing is a form of propaganda, right? We are trying to propagate certain ideas to get people to think in a certain way. The difference is this is propaganda that is making people aware
of
that
propaganda.
And how it works, how it functions, so you can, be less susceptible to it. It doesn't mean you'll be perfectly immune. I don't think anyone's perfectly immune from it. But the more you understand how it works, the less susceptible you're going to be, and the less likely it's going to affect you. You'll be able to recognize, oh, this is, trying to make me think in this way, or is trying to, make me buy this or that. It's all around us. Everything from art to commercials to billboards to presidential speeches.
Absolutely.
Or TikTok stars, talking to presidents who happen to
Where does that leave us now? Where do we go from here? I have a few minutes left. Probably should jump off.
Maybe give us, some final thoughts. What, like you said, where does that leave us now? Maybe that's the question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, we're up against it with, I think, a global elite that is using ideology, propaganda, and power. They're using everything at their disposal right now, and they effectively well, as I started off reading that quote of mine, they're going to try to figure it all as benign as actually beneficial to the general weal. They're going to try to figure it as necessary for our survival with climate change and all these things. And just recognize, I would like to leave people with this idea, recognize that this totalitarianism is best disguised by telling you that it's in your best interest to adopt it, and that it's for the common good and all this. They're going to use that kind of rhetoric for a good while, and some would say that at some point they'll come out being, their naked power will show itself. I think that's true, it will, but they'll never stop using this kind of ideology.
Yeah, so it's really important to call it out, to be aware of it, and to do what you can in every small way. We have the podcast, but maybe people out there, they can't do that. So maybe you could just
if in fact there are puppet masters, and I said this at the talk where I gave, where James Lindsay also spoke after me. The key is to detach the strings from your body. We don't have to know who they are. If you detach the strings from yourself, from your mind and body, then they can't manipulate you.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the trick. That's why we like to talk about ponerology and psychopathy and
propaganda, all that stuff. Yeah. Be aware of the strings, start to see them, and one by one you'll be able to pluck them off. And that stops feeding this system, this agenda.
That's maybe the only power we have.
Yes. Is our choices right now and how we just act and think and live. And you don't have to do what we're doing and have podcasts and write books and stuff. It can be in smaller ways, have conversations with people in your life, who are close to you. Describe it, there are smaller ways you can push back. And if anything, those smaller ways collectively are probably the best ways to defeat it.
That's the best way, actually. It's the smaller things and each individual doing what they can do to stay free from these manipulators. And that's the best advice I can give.
Yeah.
Michael, tell everyone where they can find you online.
It's all at michaelrectenwald.com. That's RECTENWALD.com. My essays are all up there. They're free, although you probably has paid me to write them. And but they're free to the readers. I don't charge anything on Substack. The only thing I charge for are my books. And all of that is found at michaelrectenwald.com. All my interviews, essays, videos, and so forth.
We'll throw the link in the description. Michael, thank you so much for your time and for having this very important discussion with us and for all the work that you're doing and, taking those slings and arrows, man, because it's definitely, I know it's a difficult thing. It's very exhausting. So I commend you.
Thanks so much. And it's great to be on here with you guys today. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again, Michael. Yeah. I'm going to end the recording. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, give us money, all the things. Share with your friends. Share the show with your friends. We love you. Stay safe. Stay sane. Bye-bye.
Later, guys.